Today, we're talking about corpse handling. Are you a bit squeamish? If so, strap yourselves in, because the FBI will find a cooler full of penises, a woman's head sewn on a dude's torso and hung on an office wall, and somebody thawing out human remains with a garden hose out in the sun. And the FBI will then punish these people with the equivalent of a traffic ticket. Today, we're going neck deep into the world of body brokers. Mark Calderaro, attractive nuisance. First, I got the inspiration for this video from a now-defunct Substack by Depressive Ghoul. I know them from their amazing serial killer greeting cards. I'll link to the original article in the description and their shop, because if you're looking to celebrate a loved one's birthday with the help of Ted Bundy, Depressive Ghoul is your first, last, and, well, quite frankly, really only shot at that. So, Mark, that was a pretty crazy intro. What are body brokers? Well, first, let me tell you that body brokers are an offensive term, and they prefer non-transplant tissue banks. So, body brokers, what are they? Well, it sounds weird, but some companies need dead bodies. Researchers rely on human body parts to develop new surgical instruments, techniques, implants, medicines, etc. And surgeons, paramedics, and even funeral directors use them for training and education, right? But where do you get them? You can't just kill anybody for them. If you're a school or a state facility, it's pretty easy to work with hospitals to kind of get your needs fulfilled there. But if you're not that lucky, where do you go? What do you turn to? Well, the answer, of course, is body brokers. And even though organs and tissues for transplant are highly regulated in the U.S., no federal law governs the sale of cadavers or body parts for their use in research or education. In almost every state, it's legal to sell adult human remains. It's actually pretty easy to get bodies when you target the poor and the elderly. Generally, all you have to do is offer free body removal, cremation, and then assure them that it's going to a worthy cause. And then people will just give you loved ones' bodies. After the American medical system has, well, quite frankly, drained the net worth of all of these families trying to keep them alive for a couple extra years, it's often a welcome relief for someone to come in and provide all these services for you. Now, generally, a broker can sell a donated human body for between $5,000 and $10,000 each. And again, because they're donated, that's almost pure profit. Bodies and body parts can be bought, sold, leased, again and again. And with basically no oversight, it's been described by multiple people as a free-for-all, comparing it to the 19th century grave robbing situations. Bodies and body parts promised to one thing will go to something completely different. Who's to tell? And sometimes that thing completely different is super offensive. Take, for example, the sad case of this Arizona resident who expected that his mom's brain was being donated to Alzheimer's research and that he would get the rest of the ashes back. Well, what happened was he only got the ashes from her hand, and that was because the rest of her was sent to the Pentagon to perform IED experiments. Her corpse was strapped onto a seat, and an IED was exploded underneath the seat to see what happened. Now, I mean, you need bodies to do that, I suppose, but you should probably tell the person that that's going to happen to their mom's body. I don't know, maybe I'm alone in this. But regardless, companies with anodyne names like Biological Resource Services and Southern Nevada Donors Center rake in cash telling sob stories to poor loved ones, then donating bodies or body parts to whoever they want. And because there's no oversight, you don't need to have any sort of standards on how to get those parts apart, or even how to keep and store them after you've parted them. Though the founder of the reputable Research for Life body brokers invested more than $2 million in quality control procedures and medical equipment, including over $250K for one X-ray machine to scan cadavers for surgical implants, other brokers have launched for less than $100K. In 2017, Reuters explained, often the largest capital expenses are a cargo van and a set of freezers. Some brokers have saved money by using chainsaws to carve up the dead instead of more expensive surgical saws. It doesn't take a lawyer like me to recognize that that shit's pretty fucked up. This skin and bones approach to cost cutting doesn't end after the startup costs either, because when donees are just getting ashes back, why do you have to provide them with their own ashes? Take the case of poor John Butch of Chicago. When his daughter Alexandra tragically passed, he donated her body to what he thought would be scientific research, and the company mailed him back ashes from the parts of her that would otherwise have gone unused, per their agreement. He got a nice little box and everything. The only problem was, a few months later, the FBI raided some Detroit storehouse, and guess what they found? Her corpse. So whose ashes did he have? He has no idea. Are they human even? Who knows? And guess what? Even though that sounds terrible and we should prosecute these people to the fullest extent of the law, the issue is there isn't really much fullest extent to that law, because the criminal justice system is mostly set up for punishing crimes against living people. Judges and prosecutors have mostly had to scratch and stretch other laws to try and apply them in situations like this, and often they simply can't. If you look at Honolulu, police were called twice to a facility leased by Brian Avery, and they found decomposing, improperly stored human remains both times. But they said that there was simply no applicable state law for them to prosecute them under. People familiar with the situation said everybody knew that what he did was unethical and wrong, but did he break any laws? Not the way they're written today. At that inoffensively named Nevada company, Southern Nevada Donors Center, some dude was thawing a frozen human torso in the sun with a garden hose, with, from the state health report, tissue and blood washing into the gutters, weaving past storefronts and pooling across the street. And guess what this led to? A minor pollution citation for the worker himself. Nothing for the company at all. Are our laws even equipped to properly punish the dude who sent HIV and hepatitis infected bodies to be used as cadavers? Fraud doesn't really seem to cover it, does it? But that's what we have to charge them with, is fraud, and then hope that we can just stick a lot of years on the fraud charge. Another man convicted on, I hate to even say this, a similar crime, argued on his appeal that the judge improperly threw the book at him, providing too heavy a sentence for someone just convicted on 3 counts of mail fraud. To this day, he maintains that forging identities, ages, and blood samples to make sure that he could sell untested, high-risk corpses to people, some of which were in fact riddled with cancer and communicable diseases, he just went to prison for using whiteout. That's it. Mail fraud and fraud. Even the most famous case, Stephen Gore's Biological Resource Center, had barely any criminal punishment at all. Now, if you've heard of body brokers before this video, you've definitely heard about Stephen Gore. In 2014, the FBI raided one of his warehouses, and among other things, of course, they found, and I'm going to quote directly here because, well, quite frankly, it's hard to say, so. Buckets of heads, arms, and legs, coolers filled with male genitalia, a woman's head sewn onto a larger male's torso, like Frankenstein hanging on a wall, infected heads, bodies without ID tags chopped up with chainsaws and bandsaws, pools of human blood and other bodily fluids on the freezer floor. Pardon me, this one's a little hard. If you see more cuts than usual in this video, that's why. Okay, so in the criminal trial in which he was obviously found guilty, he was only charged with operating an illegal enterprise. He was sentenced to 1 year deferred prison and 4 years probation. That's it. With liability like that, it's no wonder the industry boomed, and boomed with the type of people you don't want leading any boom, unless it's an actual bomb. In a pre-sentencing letter to his judge, Gore wrote that he felt overwhelmed, but that he was working in an industry with no formal regulations to reference for guidance. Quote, I could have been more open about the process of donation. When deciding which donors could be eligible to donate, maybe I should have hired a medical director rather than relying on medical knowledge from books or the internet. These are the people we're dealing with right here. And these are the people that go into the body broking industry and are the reason that nationwide body brokering is a $1 billion industry, and that number is before the pandemic. Now, it's tough to know exactly how much is dealt with here because so few states actually keep track of any of these sort of information. But we do know at least between 2011 and 2015, there were at least 50,000 bodies that went through body brokers and more than 182,000 unique body parts. Now, as someone who is trying to research these numbers, I cannot tell you how weird it is to see invoices that just say things like 27 shoulders on them. It is surreal, and it doesn't stop getting surreal. But don't take the body broker boom from me. Take it from Phoenix's own Walt Mitchell, a dude involved in at least 10 body broker companies across 5 states. He said, "If you can't make a business when you're getting raw materials for free, you're dumb as a box of rocks." That's right, this man is referring to human bodies as raw materials. By the way, Mitchell is currently on trial for scattering bodies among a forest fire after one of his own businesses closed. He's representing himself in that case. Also, in the investigation, they found a pipe bomb in a safe in his home. No one quite knows why. This wasn't Mitchell's first run-in with the law. That was in 1993, well before his body brokering days, when he stole $10,000 from a McDonald's where he worked. He had gotten the job by falsifying his job application, and then he fled to Mexico. Again, this was before he started handling your loved ones after they died. Oh, silly me. And one more thing I forgot about Walt Mitchell. He self-published a serial killer novel in 2012, and guess how the serial killer disposes of their victims? That's right, they use a body donation program to hide them. These are the people who are leading the body brokering industry. The National Funeral Directors Association was not exaggerating when they said almost anyone can dissect and sell or lease human bodies. By the way, I did look into what leasing a body looks like, and you know what? I'm going to let that sleeping corpse lie. If you want to look it up on your own time, do your own Googling, knock yourself out. So, shit's pretty fucked up, right? Well, what can we do about it? Well, in 2004, a Harper's Magazine expose uncovered that bodies like these were being used in landmine experiments. After that, a federal health panel tried to get the federal government to pass laws, but the calls fell on deaf and probably disembodied ears. And states don't seem to be in a particular hurry to make legislation around this area either. Though in Virginia and Florida, regulators need to give advance permission before a broker may bring body parts into the state. And in Oklahoma and Oregon, they inspect brokers regularly and, do some record keeping. But these are the outliers. And even in states that do pass laws, there are still other hurdles to overcome. In New Jersey, they passed a law in 2008, but it kind of just never went into effect when a shifting legislature decided to block the funds. So the law's on the books, but... And then in Maine created rules that require brokers to get a registered license and things like that. The officials haven't actually bothered to write the rules about getting a license because no one's applied for a permit. Though this all sounds kind of grim, there are 2 bright spots in ways to kind of change and reform the body brokering industry. The first section we should look to is tort law. Tort law comes to the rescue as a stopgap measure often, and it's no different here. I know that tort law is mystical to a lot of people, but think of it as whenever you sue somebody that's not over a contract, right? If you're a victim of some sort of terrible, behavior and you have damages, well, courts think that maybe the person or people who did those damages should pay for them, right? And they can kind of work as this sort of stopgap where criminal law doesn't always feel applicable. Think about like O.J. Simpson, right? He won his criminal case, right? But then he lost hard his wrongful death tort action, right? And had to pay a lot of money. And torts are kind of often used in that way, even though tort reform has been used as this clarion call for some politically over the last 4 decades. Torts are often on the forefront of defending kind of newer or less socially accepted rights that we look at on their face and think, wow, this is pretty immoral, right? law happens really slowly, and deciding that something is criminal usually takes a lot of time. Just look at how long it took the law to figure out about revenge porn, right? Revenge porn had been around for a good decade before one state decided, hey, maybe we should do something about it. And so kind of what torts can do is, even if it's controversial, they end up figuring out the metes and bounds of liability often before we decide if we should lock someone up for that liability. And so even if there isn't a great record for criminalizing specifically what's been happening in the body broker industry, there's a long history in tort law of mishandling corpses as justification for compensation. So this has been an avenue that will go down a bit. You know, most of the history in torts happens in this weird, controversial world of negligent infliction of emotional distress, or NIED. There we go. Traditionally, courts hate NIED. The judge I interned for would literally roll his eyes when someone tried to claim it. Now, basically, in distinguishing it from intentional infliction of emotional distress, NIED is when you do a behavior, not directed towards me, that is so extreme and outrageous that I suffer mental damages that I think you should pay for. Think of an example like this. My friend and I are walking down the street. You drive your car into my friend, kill him, and then toss his body over a cliff in front of me. I have to go to years of therapy having seen this. Now, if I succeed on an NIED claim, you'd be paying for my therapy. And most likely, you'd also pay some punitive damages so that you would be dissuaded from killing someone and throwing them off a cliff in the future, right? That's NIED. As far back as the 1800s, courts have called the damages from NIED too remote or metaphysical, and quite frankly, too easily faked. Modern courts still talk about how those damages can be too speculative, and mostly they're kind of right. I mean, when a hospital negligently lets a corpse freezer burn out, and then it makes your mother leak all over her casket at the funeral, what are the actual damages from that? It's a real question that actually a state Supreme Court has answered before. They put a number on it. And there are many disputed kind of competing theories about how to compensate people or who can even recover from NIED. Because courts dislike it so much, they're trying to curtail it and figure out the metes and bounds, right? And so some courts will do what's called a zone of danger test, saying that, like, if you could have been injured as well, then maybe you can recover. And then other courts do things like, if you're related to the person closely by blood, then maybe you can recover. There's a lot of kind of little things they do. But what is uncontested is that in every jurisdiction, they recognize two carve-outs that say, well, no matter what, you should definitely be able to recover from this. And it is when someone tells you that a family member has died negligently and they haven't. Or when someone mishandles a corpse. Even in states that have explicitly chosen not to recognize recovery under negligent infliction of emotional distress, there are negligent mishandling of a corpse exceptions. Though this most often applies to hospitals violating their standards of care regarding bodies, it's definitely not just them who can be found liable, and don't worry, they're not the only ones. Even in states without a lot of great case law on point, courts will still magically find ways for plaintiffs to recover when a corpse has been mishandled. Pennsylvania courts found a way when someone was forced by a killer to help bury their relative's body. And Maine courts found for the plaintiff when a hospital mailed a son personal effects from his dead father that accidentally included his severed leg. In torts, sometimes the law is bent towards justice. And the torts case of Stephen Gore has showed us a path for other victims of the body brokering industry. Though it doesn't have to do with negligent infliction of emotional distress, because Gore intentionally obtained these bodies through fraud. In 2019, 10 of the 21 plaintiffs against Stephen Gore received $8.5 million in compensatory damages and $58.5 million in punitive damages. That's one of the largest civil awards in Arizona history. And even though the punitive damages were lowered to $17 million by the trial judge because they thought they were excessive, a month ago, an appeals court reinstated the original $58.5 million, saying, no, this isn't excessive. This dude had a cooler full of penises. So, there's still some hope, thanks to judges basically kind of twisting other laws to find these people liable for something terrible. And tort law isn't our only savior either. And on this point, this is where you come in and can do something to help. Though prospects for this stuff is always dim, last year, federal legislation was introduced into the House of Representatives. It was co-authored by Bobby Rush of Illinois and Gus Bilirakis of Florida. The bill is called the Consensual Donation and Research Integrity Act, CDIR, or HR 4062. Now, the thing that this act does is it creates a clear chain of custody for each human body or body part. It ensures shipments of human bodies and body parts are properly labeled and packaged. It ensures that respectful and proper disposition of donated bodies and body parts. And it also establishes penalties for these violations. Okay, now this is backed by groups like the National Funeral Directors Association and the unfortunately named Funeral Consumers Alliance, which really sounds like a group full of people who eat dead corpses. But they're not, I promise. But stuff like this, it hasn't moved in over a year. It was just sit there and it's waiting on a health subcommittee. So if you think we should have a more comprehensive federal way to stop people sewing up your grandma and exploding her corpse after telling you that she's been in the next Bodies exhibit, then you should call your local representative and talk to them about HR 4062. Chances are they probably haven't even heard of it, but if they get enough people calling and pushing for it, then it'll happen, right? So, we took a weird twisting path, didn't we? It started really gross, and then it got into the history of negligence, which probably wasn't interesting, but I learned a lot. And then we ended on actual steps that you can do. Seems like a pretty informative video to me. So if you liked this, if you like this stuff, then you know what? If you can, A, like and subscribe, and then B, send me the timestamp in which you first almost vomited from hearing my descriptions. That's all. Thanks so much. Have a great week. Mark Calderaro. Attractive nuisance. So strap in, because the FBI is going to be finding penises full of coolers.